Penn State football falls 30-27 to Michigan State in the snow in East Lansing to end the season 7-5. We're here to talk about that. Maybe. I tried to talk about the game on the BWI Live post-game show. Mostly we talked about James Franklin's contract. So we'll see how that goes today, but the plan is to talk about the game, what went into it, and how Penn State could have made the outcome a little bit different had they done a couple of things differently. I'm joined, as always, by the BWI Live crew. Dave Eckert, Nate Bauer, here with me once again. Gentlemen, happy holidays, and I just want to say publicly, thanks so much for doing this show with me all season long. I have had a blast doing this. Win, lose, no draws, because that's impossible, although they tried. I appreciate you guys being here on Monday. So, good afternoon, Nate. How are you doing today, and how are you recovering from East Lansing?
I'm horrible.
Okay, well, moving on, Dave.
I'm fine. I'm fine. It's fine. But the holidays are over, and there's no more time for your niceties. Let's go.
Okay, so we're officially in a holiday gap. That's what we're calling this, because it is Cyber Monday. We're all getting ready for Christmas. So, David, have you done any shopping this weekend? And how was Thanksgiving with your parents?
It was great. I did absolutely no shopping, which made it even better. Yeah, I did not have the distinct pleasure of going to East Lansing for the game, but based on how that seemed to have went, I'm kind of happy about that. So I'm doing all right.
Well, let's talk about the game, and that's what people are here for, after all. They come for that. They stay for the camaraderie, I think. Anyway, that's what I'm here for. So Penn State's offensive game plan has been debated. It has been criticized all weekend long. So let's start with the offense and the offensive game plan. Nate, was Penn State too conservative on Saturday, especially in the second half?
I don't know. It was horrible. The weather conditions were legitimately really, really bad. And I would have to go back and check the numbers, but I'm pretty sure that Michigan State ran it constantly.
Yes.
in the second half.
Yes,
right?
they did.
So when the game deteriorated, when the weather conditions deteriorate, and I get it. I understand how frustrating it can sound to a fan to hear something like the weather dictated what your game plan was or how you operated, but it was legitimately a snow squall. It was consistent snow. It was very obviously impacting play. It was impacting play at the beginning of the game, but it absolutely picked up in the second half. And so, there's this constant debate over doing something that is like bold, right? Versus just playing to what conventional wisdom says to do in a situation like that. And no matter what you do, if you lose, then you've made the wrong choice.
Right.
And so
if you zigged, you should have zagged. If you threw the ball, you should have run. All year long, people have been asking about the running game, and here we are. They run the ball 26 times, I think, or something like that, and now it's why didn't you throw the football? The context being that Michigan State is really bad at defending the pass, but do you reasonably expect to throw the ball in those conditions? And that's why I wanted to ask you. It looked bad on TV. Was it as bad when you were watching players on the field? Were people consistently having their footing to execute those situations?
No, nobody had their footing. Now, obviously, it is an advantage to the offense over the defense, right? Because the offense is moving forward, the defense is moving backward. And so in those conditions, there is a little bit of an advantage offensively, but my main problem here is that Penn State was in a position, it wasn't that Penn State failed offensively because it ran the ball. It failed offensively because it couldn't convert a 4th and 1.
Yep.
It fumbled at midfield, and then it fumbled a kickoff return.
Yep.
That's it. They didn't lose because they decided to run the ball. They moved the ball offensively in the second half. They just didn't convert when they needed to. They didn't make the plays that they needed to.
They didn't have the ball. So this is another thing, and Dave, I want to get to you in a second, but I have to address this because I'm dying here with this particular conversation. Is they didn't have the football for most of the game. Michigan State in the first and third quarter held onto the ball for 20 minutes. The Penn State defense, as we've talked about, another part that isn't talked about enough this weekend so far, has been the Penn State defense gave up 9 of 18 and 3 of 4 on fourth down. The footing and everything is one thing, sure, but some of those are 4th and 15. That's not footing. That's like that's a critical systems failure. So, Dave, I'm going to, at the risk of being redundant, I'm going to ask you the same question, though, giving my opinion. Do you agree with that, or was Penn State in the wrong for not throwing the ball as much in the second half?
Look, I mean, maybe would I have liked to have seen them attack that weakness more? Yes. Am I going to sit here and say that it's the reason that they lost the game? No. What was the only thing that was confusing to me about all of this, right? And I think we're going to come on to it, is that James Franklin, after the game, had the chance to say, we didn't throw the ball because it was snowing. And that is not what he said.
Yep.
So that, to me, is the kind of the conflict.
So what is that reason in your mind of why they didn't do it then? Do you have a speculation as to the reason behind that?
No, I mean, if that is not the explanation, then to be honest, I don't know what it is, because again, this is an offense that has passed the ball with considerable success most of the season. Its running game stinks. We know that. So if that is not the reason, then I'm shrugging my shoulders. Maybe T. Frank, you've got something up your sleeve, but I don't know. So
before I get to that, and I do have sort of a theory, but one that isn't backed up by James Franklin saying much after the game, and that press conference did not help him in the light afterwards of this game. To me, just kind of putting a bow on this particular topic is Penn State, and Nate, you hit it on the head. Michigan State ran the ball as much as Penn State. They were equally ineffective on a lot of plays when it came to the running game. They just hit a couple more, and in critical situations, they threw the football. Penn State couldn't get off the field because Michigan State in 3rd and 8 was putting guys in space and putting guys on skates. And Penn State didn't have the opportunities to do that because in the second half, Michigan State had the ball longer because the defense couldn't get off the field and because Penn State's offense couldn't convert those because too many times they were running the football. And they weren't putting guys... The way I phrased it after the game and the way I phrased it in my article today, in my film review over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is, if you make a player cut, if you force the action, you've won that rep. No one can adjust to movement in that environment, and Michigan State did that part better. Penn State was able to do that a couple of times on the ground, get some good chunks, but in those critical situations, the Michigan State defensive line was the one that forced the action. Nate, you were there with James Franklin after the game. And by the way, just quickly, I'll get to you in 1 second. Do want to address Dave and Ryan? We're going to get to your questions. Want to address some of the main storylines coming up first, but always appreciate our Super Chat listeners who are throwing in their thoughts and their donations to the channel. If you want to do that as well, be like them. All you have to do is give a quick donation to the channel. We'll answer your question, but I want to get through some of these topics first. Now, Nate, you were about to say something.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the stat book, and I have just a moment of pause because I understand the argument about passing. Like, has anybody actually looked at the breakdown of rushing attempts versus passes in the second half for Penn State? Because they actually threw the ball, or were trying to throw the ball, 21 times to 13 rushes. So you had a 2-to-1 ratio there.
Yeah.
Like, they did try to pass the ball in the second half. They were attempting to throw it. It's just that all of our fixations are naturally going to be on the end of drives, like the end of possessions. And those possessions in the succession ended on rushing carries. So I get it, but I'm not sure that this is quite what happened in real life versus what our perception of what happened is.
I want to come back to you, and I want to ask you about the post-game press conference and what, if anything, you heard from James Franklin and your take on how that went down. Because the hecklers aside, it didn't seem like James was interested in giving actual answers to anything. Even to Dave's point, where he just said, we want to run the ball all season. I got the sense that he was not interested in answering questions, so he just said whatever to get through that. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah.
And then what do you think about how that he handled that and that tactic to get through that press conference?
So I don't want to take us too far off the train tracks here, but there needs to be some elaboration as to what Penn State's actual setup is for post-game press conferences. So because of COVID, Penn State and James Franklin specifically have not had inside press conferences after games at all this season. They haven't had any press conferences inside. That's Tuesday has been via Zoom. Wednesday is outside after practice. And then even his Thursday radio show, they sit outside at a restaurant. So it has all been outside. And in September and October, when the weather is fairly nice, that's fine. Not too big of a deal. And at home at Beaver Stadium, also not too big of a deal. They do it out on the field, and you've got a home crowd, which presumably is, fairly friendly to the head coach. However, that is not the case in road venues. And so they were able at Ohio State to kind of tuck James Franklin away from, so it was just outside of the locker room, but it wasn't a distraction. There were no fans coming by. Michigan State's setup was just off of the concourse, like the main concourse that all of fans are going to be walking past on their way out of the stadium. And it might not sound like it, but Franklin did a post-game press conference on Saturday, maybe 20 minutes after the game had ended. The band was still out on the field, okay? So it's loud. It is literally snowing. So you can see some of the snow hitting Franklin in that environment. And you've got all these fans walking by, including people who presumably had a few cocktails on the day. And so there was no inhibition from people basically just shouting at him as he was talking in that post-game press conference. You couldn't actually hear all of it in terms of what was happening as he was answering questions. And so, long story short, if we're going to give the benefit of the doubt to him, it's that, one, he just lost a game that he probably felt like they could have won. Two, it was miserable. It was cold. It was wet. It was gross. You have to do the post-game press conference. I get it. But all of these different factors created a tsunami of, he was over it. Like he didn't want anything to do with it. And so he bailed more or less mentally on that post-game press conference. And that's why you get a 4-minute session after the game.
I want to throw this in here now from David, who has some pretty strong opinions of James Franklin. PSU a competent O-line away from 11-1 or 12-0 and Indy, or better coaching from James Franklin and the staff. I don't care what anyone else says. That's pretty much where we need to end if that's going to be the feeling afterwards. But Taquan Roberson, Sean at Illinois, 34 passes against Michigan State were coaching failures. Dave, I'm going to come to you first before we go back to Nate. Where do you think James Franklin needs to improve as a coach? Because this was not a good season for Penn State on any phase, offense, defense, special teams, or coaching, given where the season ended. What do you think the areas of improvement for James Franklin are specifically, to not just say coaching and then yell at it like government? What do you think James Franklin needs to do to become a better coach to avoid situations like this where they have multiple winnable games and then they don't win those games?
Yeah, I just think, and look, I'll leave the X's and O's and all of that to you, T. Frank. That's not my expertise. But if you look at, the patterns of the games that Penn State has lost where you feel like they should be winning them, they all seem to come when there is some sort of weird stuff happening, more or less, right? Like it just feels like Penn State loses when weird stuff out of its control happens and Penn State doesn't adjust to it well.
That's a fair point. Don't ever play at Michigan State. Never go to East Lansing.
So to me, that's, if you're going to pick out an area, like, and try to be a little bit more detailed than like, he needs to use his timeouts better. That would be it. Because I just think that, again, you look at Iowa, right? Something out of Penn State's control, Sean Clifford gets hurt. Again, Illinois, right? Sean Clifford is hurt. You look at Michigan State, another one of those games you feel like they should have won. There's a freaking snowstorm. So, again, it does feel like that's a pattern, and it's not just a this season thing to me. So if you're going to circle one thing, that might be it. Maybe adjusting to just random crap that comes up a little bit better, because
it's a great way to put
it feels
that.
like the really good teams do that, and maybe Penn State hasn't recently.
And adjusting, I think, has been something that Penn State fans have been frustrated with James Franklin with in general. You mentioned Sean Clifford and putting in Taquan Roberson, and that's our backup, and then not reading the room of, well, it's not going well, so maybe we should find another answer. I think adjusting is a really good point. Nate, you actually wrote about the program being at a crossroads with James Franklin after the 7-5 season. What can you elaborate about that article for the fans right now, and your thoughts on this topic of James Franklin, the coach, and James Franklin, the architect of the program? By the way, if you want to read the full article, which is phenomenal, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, and you can sign up on Cyber Monday for just $1, and you get 12 months, the entire next season for just $1. 12 months for just $1. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Sign up for On3. So, Nate, set you up. What do you want to say about James Franklin, management, the program, crossroads? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to, honestly, even taking on that column was more than I wanted to do, just because I feel like it's so expansive, right? The situation that Penn State is in as a program has so many different tentacles that are going on. But the main thing I see for Penn State, did I lose you? No, I didn't.
Nope, you're with us.
Sorry. The main thing that I see for Penn State is that it positioned itself to be competitive in all of these games, right? So 21 points separating them from their 5 losses, with Ohio State being the one that obviously did not, right? Like, that was the least competitive game of their losses. But even their wins against good teams, Auburn and Wisconsin, were close. And so you've got a team that isn't good enough to steamroll really anybody that's on the level. And so if for the teams that it is competitive with right now, there are things that Penn State needs to do to better position itself to win. Like, you have to win. You have to go 500 at least in those types of games. And Penn State wasn't able to do it this year. Like, that's the thing that to me is kind of striking, is everybody's going to ignore the wins, but I kind of broke it down as 6 games that Penn State played against like competition, right? So other teams that were ranked. And in those games, in isolation, you can say, hey, Iowa, Sean Clifford gets hurt. All right, you can kind of explain that one away. Although there were still some things that happened. You can explain away Michigan. That's a good team. You can explain away Michigan State, certainly, right? But in combination, there are things about all of those games that are consistent. And that is the offense not being able to run the ball, right? This is a fundamental, foundational element of the game that Penn State just was never able to figure out this season for a variety of reasons, but you got to figure it out. You have to figure it out. Penn State, as a result of that offensive, failing, was not able to score points. Like they did not score points this season. 20 points a game in the Big Ten. Like, that's not going to get it done. Defensively, they allowed points in the fourth quarter of every one of those games that were critical to deciding the outcome. And most important to me is they lost points in 4 out of those 5 games from their field goal kicker. For not like 55-yard attempts. These were between 20 and 29 yards. He missed 2 between 20 and 29 yards, and he missed another 3, I believe, between 40 and 49 yards. So all of those things, when you're talking about an average margin of loss of 4.2 points per game in those 5 games, that's the deal, is you have to shore up all of those different elements if you're going to come out on the winning side of them. But that does not mean blow the whole thing up, right? Like, you're not that far away from turning those losses into wins, but you got to be better. And so this entirety of this offseason has to be dedicated and has to be spent and built around fixing that, right? Like, fixing all of those fundamental areas to be improved so that you can win those games.
Yeah, and back to the point we made a little bit earlier, I think one of the things is the flexibility of James Franklin is a creature of habit. That habit has built a very good program, but there has to be an evolution in the idea of if what you're doing gets you to a certain point, you do need to make some adjustments, or you need to look inwardly at some of those things, which James Franklin talks about this every year, right, David, of the scouting of their own systems and processes when it comes to offense and defense. Do you think that there needs to be a scouting of decision-making and all of those things, or is that a part of what they do every offseason?
I think they do it in season. I mean, he talks about, hey, we meet and we discuss how this went. I don't think it's something that they're blind to. But it's I think, again, and I think this might be where Nate was going with this a little bit, but I think there are like actual football issues, and it's not, well, okay, we've got the football stuff taken care of. Now we just need to call our timeouts at the right place. Like, I don't think it's right. That. I don't think that's what this is. Penn State has actual problems. This is not this perfect team that is going to win 11 games if right. James Franklin calls the right play at the right, or if Mike Yursich does either. So, that's not what this is.
So this is I think part of that point is who chooses O-line personnel for each game. James Franklin, the offensive line coach, because there were no tangible adjustments. It was, let's just get right. better along the offensive line. I think the Rutgers game should be an indication of what they had behind those starters. And from my evaluation of those backup players, it wasn't pretty. It was not a good situation. But Landon Tengwall, another long-standing thing, Penn State does not play freshmen. He has come in, and every time he's come into the game so far, albeit only 2 drives, 18 snaps on Saturday, he has performed above expectation and been one of the better offensive linemen on the field. This is another one of those situations of, does that need to be addressed of, we don't play true freshmen because we want them to redshirt along the offensive line, but should there be more flexibility in those areas? Some of the things that will lead to direct football results. The recruiting is one thing. It's the management of the players and the positional, all of those things when it comes to the offensive line specifically in this situation. Nate, is that something that you think James Franklin is right about, of sticking to that and saying we're not playing a freshman because we think his long-term development is more important than whatever happens now?
Some of these questions are hard to answer without being in the room and knowing what they're considering, because from what I've seen, it does not seem to me as though James Franklin or Penn State institutionally as a program has like a blanket rule. Oh, well, we're not going to play freshmen. We don't want to throw them into the fire. It's too much for any freshman. I don't think that's the case at all. They played Connor McGovern as a freshman. There have been times where a freshman has come in and been good enough to beat out the guy ahead of him. However, oftentimes I think that's not the case. I think it is incredibly rare and difficult. And if you look at Penn State's recruiting on the offensive line, there have not been so many slam dunks to that end to make because this is still what we're talking about here, an 18-year-old body in
I
a
was
better
corrected.
position.
He's 19. He turned 19 in July. So,
but you know what I'm saying?
No, I know exactly what you're saying. I said the same thing earlier today.
It's just, people have the phrase that everybody uses, like being galted, but
yeah, it's
true. It is true. You need some seasoning at this level. Look, like you're talking about Michigan State in the trenches. This is big boy football, and I think that Penn State has some issues that it needs to correct to begin with from its seniors playing big boy football.
Yeah.
Right. So to for the expectation to be different, that a 18, 19-year-old is going to come in and be able to physically, he might know exactly what he's doing. He might have all the football IQ in the world and be able to pick up the technique and the coaching and all those different things, know all the plays, know all the stunts. But if he can't handle the push, then you're going to lose those reps. And as everything has come to be crystallized this season and in so many other seasons for Penn State, a couple of lapses on the offensive line can be disastrous.
Yeah.
It can be the critical blow. And so that,
and to your point, Mike Miranda has had those this season when it comes to blitz pickup and being able to get guys on run stunts. One of the things I didn't even get to touch on in my article this week is this was one of his worst games in terms of just overall play, and he's in likely his final regular season game for Penn State. So it's not just the reason I bring up Landon Tengwall is because he's the only guy that has performed well late in the season, and he's the only guy that it seems is like help is on the way. He's the only one that you could point to because we haven't seen Ola Fashunu. We haven't seen some of those other guys.
I got to say one thing about Mike Miranda because he's getting crushed, and I get it.
Yeah.
That dude has been hurt for at least the last 3 or 4 games. It became obvious in maybe the Michigan game. I think he got pulled. I'm not sure exactly, but it should tell you the position that Penn State is in. They don't have a choice. So this dude is trying to gut it out and get through it for his team. And he is absolutely getting pounded when Penn State has no other options. There are not other people that moving Juice. All right, fine. But who's taking Juice's role? What are your options there? And Penn State just doesn't have a lot of them right now.
Yeah. Dave, this is something that I was thinking about as to the situation Penn State was in late in the game. We're talking about the offensive line. One guy, one of the things James Franklin did talk about after the game was we wanted to mix in the run to help the offensive line out. Bryce Effner in at left tackle for Rasheed Walker that did not play on Saturday. And this is the second week in a row that he has not played. Do you think that was an overcorrection by the staff of watching the Michigan State defensive line on film, saying that's a nasty pass rush, and we've got our, I'd say, emergency backup tackle? I don't even know that Bryce Effner is really the backup. There is no backup to Rasheed Walker. Do you think that was an overcorrection considering the snow and the ability for anyone really to get after the quarterback at a regular rate?
I don't know, because if you take the snow out of it, right, Penn State moved the ball best when it was throwing the ball. Those 2 drives in the first quarter, in the first half there, Penn State just kind of ate up yardage, throwing the ball to Jahan Dotson. So obviously the pass rush was a factor. I think Michigan State had 4 sacks, but if you kind of put those on opposite ends of the scale, at least to me, the upside of moving the ball effectively and just scoring points, I think it outweighs the Michigan State pass rush a little bit to me. Yeah, so I guess I lean toward it being a weather thing rather than trying to slow down the pass rush. That's just my interpretation.
A quick detour I want to make here about Stephen Light's comment, because this is something that was talked about quite a bit on the message board over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. If you want to sign up and go in and share your thoughts with us at Blue White Illustrated, just $1 for the holiday Cyber Monday deal for 12 months of access. Steven says Michigan is going to make the college football playoff before Penn State does. That is very frustrating. What a dumpster fire. I just want to point out that before this season, this one singular season where it's all aligned for Michigan, they have been just as relevant as Penn State. Just as relevant during Jim Harbaugh's time at Michigan. This is the divergent year. Before that, Penn State was in the same neighborhood, knocking on the college football playoff door, being 9-17 in any one given year at the end of the season. Michigan was in the same house. The one year they were close, both of them were 5-6 in 2016. And I understand that it's frustrating to see your competitors pass you, but this is the one thing I'll say about going forward right now is this is all yet to be written of what Penn State is going to be, because they have a new offensive coordinator, they have a new offensive line coach. They're putting all of these things in position that I think is going to change the trajectory going forward, and I do think there is some positive movement on that side. Michigan, if they lose this quarterback, I don't know that they're going to really have the opportunity to do this again, what they're doing right now. So Nate, I want you to do one thing for me. We've talked a little bit about this. We've talked about the problems. Can you just fix the offensive line for me? Please, just
Sure.
Fix the offensive line. Tell me how we do that. But seriously, like, go, with this group, given that they scored 27 points and some of that was in garbage time, essentially, how do you think they performed, and how do you adjust this going forward? Because Steven puts in the chat, going forward at the bowl game, it's going to be the same thing. Just roll it out there again. And I know Penn State fans don't want to watch that again. Is there anything to be done about that?
With the current personnel?
Yeah. Yes.
No.
Make sure you turn into the BWI Live post-game show after the bowl game that you don't watch, because, it's the same guys.
I don't know what to say. There is no free agency. You can fix people through the portal in the offseason. I think certainly that's going to be an area that Penn State tries to address this offseason. But, it would help to get Nate Bruce back.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing today from Penn Live. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Just that he hated playing football in the spring. He was an early enrollee, wanted to play. He was a guy that James Franklin was talking about constantly the first 4 months that he was on campus. And then in April, he said his heart wasn't in it. He just gave up football. And so that matters. They spent 2 offensive line scholarships in the last class, and half of them, 50%, went home. So, that's a problem. Salim Wormley getting hurt. I get it. A lot of times perceptions are built around what we know of the guys that are already in position or that have already played. Sal Wormley didn't play a ton, right? He wasn't a starter before this season, but he was going to be a starter this season until he got hurt and was lost for the season in the preseason. Individually, I understand the notion of, you got to be able to withstand that. But when there's a cascade of those types of situations, it puts you where they currently are, which is not in a good spot. And so, absolutely, development, you name it. There are a lot of things that Penn State needs to do better from a coaching perspective in terms of identifying talent and then maximizing its abilities. Absolutely. But it also needs to start getting a little luckier or a little less unlucky, because some of these situations are beyond their control, and it's really, really damaging to what their options are moving forward.
Is there anything you want to add to that, Dave? I want to move on to a couple of other topics, but obviously offensive line and quarterback are going to dominate some of these conversations. Is there anything that you have to say about that particular situation of how things can fix going forward? We have a lot of opinions from the chat. What do you think is viable? You got you on mute, Dave.
Sorry, the fire alarm in my building was going off. I'm giving the mute button a workout the last couple of weeks. I just think that there's a tendency, again, and this is not a Penn State fan specific thing, this is just sports in general, to think that I don't like what I'm getting out of this position on the team that I root for, therefore there must be other options on the team that are better. and I don't agree. It's just not true. Penn State's coaching staff knows way more about their players than you do, than I do, whatever. So, again, they're making educated decisions on who to put on the field, guys. It's not just, hey, these are the 5 we started with, so just deal with it. That's not what this is.
I saw somebody, I don't remember where it was, somebody said Anthony Wiggin is obviously better than the other interior offensive lineman. Why isn't he playing? From what I saw, I think that's obviously not true, and Penn State has proven that, as you point out, there has to be a better player on the roster to actually supplant guys that are on the football field. So the situation they're in, I think we've painted a pretty clear picture. And thank you, Nate, for bringing up Nate Bruce. It's a great point of a guy that they recruited that just quit football. Especially seeing as he's one of the first guys that was identified by Phil Troutwine to bring into the football program along the offensive line. So if that continues to get better over time, I've said again and again, the guys they're bringing in are different with Phil Troutwine. This 2022 recruiting class is different than the previous ones when it comes to what they're looking for along the offensive line. So we'll see if that meshes better with Phil Troutwine and his coaching. I do think it is fair to say that there has not been any movement forward when it comes to progression at those positions from those players. The guys that are blocking are pretty much the same guys that have been blocking all season long. They're making the same mistakes that they've made all season long with some incremental progress here and there, but nothing tangibly to speak of. That does concern me a little bit. But at the same time, if a guy, you can't get blood from a stone. If a guy can't do something, no amount of teaching him how to do it doesn't give him the leg meat to drive somebody off the football. Receivers. Is there any point in bringing up this group today on the show? Because we know what we're getting with Parker Washington and Jahan Dotson, right, Nate?
Yeah. No, they're really good. Jahan's, I don't think that he will ever get the appreciation that he deserves. He has been exceptional this season in particular. And that's coming from a place where he was pretty good as a sophomore, but certainly last year and then especially this year, when everybody knows that he's getting the ball, he just continues to make spectacular plays. I thought the touchdown that he extended over the pylon was, that's, I don't know, T. Frank, that's as good as it gets as far as I am concerned.
Yep. Yeah, that was a perfect throw and a perfect catch. And his ability to make a play in the air is phenomenal. I've said several times it's one of the top 3 that I've seen at Penn State during my time covering the program. But yeah, it just comes down to when it comes to national recognition, not being on a winning team, and even James Franklin has said it so far this season, not looking the part. Right. David, coming to you once again to ask you about Kevon Lee, except this time I'm not asking you, David's asking you. Is Kevon Lee simply too slow for this offense, doesn't have the ability to cut or get upfield, and he doesn't run the way he needs to? Do you agree with that question and those statements?
I think he lacks an explosive quality that Penn State would like to have from its running back, sure. You know, as far as the rest of it, I don't know. But it's clear that he's not Saquon Barkley. He's not Miles Sanders. He's not Journey Brown. And again, obviously, if you're Penn State, you'd like to have a running back that's going to be an NFL draft pick and start in the NFL. But everybody would love to have that. But just from a profile standpoint, he's not what they want. He hasn't become what they want. Is there a place for Kevon Lee? Does he fit a role? Is he valuable? Absolutely. But I don't think he fits the profile of what the type of running back that has succeeded in the offenses here when Penn State has been a good team.
Yeah, and I think it underlines the point that Penn State, despite what James Franklin said about having one of the deepest running back rooms in America coming into the season, they still also went out and got John Lovett this offseason because they needed an explosive element. They didn't. I think they were right to not totally buy into the idea that Devin Ford was going to take the next step, and they clearly had the plan that Keziah Holmes needed to have a year of development that he missed last season. So yeah, they especially, and this is an area that I'm interested in what happens going forward, is based on what I saw previously in the Big 12 at Oklahoma State. There was way more running the ball with Mike Yurcich and way more outside zone with some of the faster, more explosive tailbacks that aren't Kevon Lee. Does that happen next season? Do they incorporate more of that? Because they tried to run it this year, and it straight up didn't work with these guys. From the offensive line to the tight ends to the running backs, it did not work. So that takes out a large chunk of your offense. So I still think that we're not seeing the complete picture from Mike Yurcich, which is why if you're talking about firing Mike Yurcich, or you're like, it just seems so reactionary to me. And part of it is Kevon Lee. Nate, this is a question I want to get to here, because this is something that it seems to me there's a difference of opinion about what James Franklin is, to circle back to this conversation. And it's one that is always going to be frustrating, I think, for people on either side of this conversation. Franklin gets paid $8 million to go 7-5 or 7-6. Here's my question. Not is the money, because whatever. Is James Franklin closer to the coach of 2016 through 19 or closer to the coach of 2021? And I think people are still holding 2015 and 14 in their mind when they talk about James Franklin, the 500 coach. Which one do you think is more true?
Oh, boy.
I'm giving you all the hard ones because you're our home run hitter, dude.
Well, no, look, like
you're in the 4 spot.
I have fundamental issues with, I don't think people understand how contracts work. Like, that's the ground level, is that James Franklin was due for a contract renegotiation. I understand that doesn't make sense. He was on a 6-year deal. You're 2 years in. Go look back at all of his other deals that Penn State has signed him to. They were all 6-year deals, and they were all renegotiated after 2 years. Okay? So let's start there.
Right.
Like, this was going to happen. This contract renegotiate, like, it didn't have anything to do with LSU or USC or anything. Penn State approached him after the Auburn game or before the Auburn game. So it didn't, none of this other stuff matters. It just doesn't. Also, he's only getting paid $7 million because he's on this year's contract. The new contract doesn't kick in for $8 million until 2022. So let's get our facts straight. As for what he is, he's the same guy. Like, he's the exact same guy. Some things have not worked out in his favor. Some things have worked out in his favor. I find it very confusing as to, and I think I've said this before, if I'm repeating myself, I apologize. I don't understand how we landed on the last 2 years as being the barometer of his performance or of the program's performance. I don't understand why it's not 3 years or 4 years. Like, there's any number of arguments to be made in any different direction based on when you're starting the clock. But for me, And I know no one wants to hear this, but I got news for people. No one at Penn State considers last year to be part of the equation. They just don't. Like that anywhere. I don't know what to tell you. So, yes, they went 4-5 in a season that they played all their games. Most of their opponents didn't play all their games. Michigan would have went 3-6 last year. It doesn't matter. Last year, it just wasn't real. And I understand the argument, oh, well, somebody won a national championship. That's fine. All good and well.
I was looking, just to your point, I was looking up yesterday to talk about the college football playoff and program building and what Penn State is trying to build and trying to show kind of the teams that make it. Ohio State got 6 wins and got in. They played half the schedule of some of the other teams in the college football playoff.
Correct. You would, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but the more games you play, the more opportunities you have to lose. I don't know, throwing that out there.
Yeah.
What other year in college football history has every team in the country played a different amount of games? It's nonsense. There were 4 teams that finished in the Big Ten with better than 500 records. 4. What are we talking about? So in any case, this year, however, will very much be a moment of reflection for Penn State. Because this year is this year. This year does count. It is a real year. They went 5-0. They put themselves in a position to compete in every game that they played. They came out on the losing end of 4 of those 6 games. And then you throw in a debacle of a loss against Illinois. Those things have to be rectified. That is what they are currently. But it's not what they are on the whole, and all of those things need to be considered. And so I think a lot of this conversation that's happening right now is very, very, very irrelevant until next year happens. If things come back next year and Penn State can't get it together and can't win 8-9 games, get itself back into a position where it is competing and winning the close games. Not all of the close games, but most of the close games, or a little more than 500 of the close games.
Right.
If they're not doing that, then they're failing. And at that point, now you can expand the sample size and say, all right, not getting it done. What's happening here? What is the prognosis? What is the problem?
Just wanted to say appreciate you, Joe. Thank you for tuning into the show. If you're like Joe and you're enjoying this particular program, make sure you hit the like button on the YouTube video. That helps everyone know, hey, it doesn't suck. And if you're listening at this point, we've been talking for 48 minutes about Penn State football. If you're still watching or if you're watching on replay, you like it. Even if you hate watching it, you're consuming it. So make sure you hit that like and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss another one. So we want to make sure that we're getting as many of these out as possible and that we're getting to as many people as possible when it comes down to what we're talking about. We haven't talked about, though, Sean Clifford. I don't think we've mentioned him really once so far about the game that happened this past weekend, which I promised we'd talk a little bit about. How do you think he performed, Dave, given that he was not given much to do at the middle half of the game? How do you think he performed when it comes to his play on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, he threw for 313 yards and 3 touchdowns, so I think he was pretty good. I think you would take that from Sean Clifford almost under pretty much any circumstance. I get it, Michigan State's pass defense sucks, but that's a good stat line. Didn't turn the ball over. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say. I thought he was pretty good. I thought his final drive, where Penn State got a touchdown late in the fourth quarter, I thought that was a very impressive effort from him. The dude just cares so much.
Yeah.
I wish that I could physically bring myself to care about something as much as Sean Clifford cares about winning, because it's honestly a little alarming, to be totally frank. But yeah, I thought he was good enough. I thought he was fine.
Now that we've seen a full season of Sean Clifford at this point, Nate, what do you think about the season he put together and the quarterback that he is? What's your big picture view of Sean Clifford in 2021?
My big picture view is that after getting hurt, he wasn't as effective at some of the areas that he needed to be, or that he was effective in the first half of the season. And so there is a very clear line of demarcation. I mean, I'm looking at it right now. He took 9 sacks over the first, and actually, he might not have even taken a sack against Iowa. So let me rephrase. He took 8 sacks in the first 6 games of the season. He took 8, 11, 19, 20 sacks in the second half of the season. Right? It's just there. Better quality defensive lines, fine. More adverse circumstances, fine. But he very clearly, to me, was not able to be as effective escaping the pocket as he had been in the first half of the season. And that is what he does. Like, that is a huge part of why he is a successful quarterback. He, this season, much more than last year, was able to keep his eyes downfield, hit open targets, right? Like, all of that was a major theme of what Penn State did offensively in the first half of the season, and it went away in the second half of the season. And so I think good things. I think he was a mature, heady quarterback who is, like Dave said, tried as hard as he possibly could, has some limitations. Nobody's going to object to that. But once he got hurt, he just wasn't exactly the same guy. And I think that came back to bite them in a lot of ways.
I want to throw this back up here from Brandon, because this is something that I know a lot of fans are thinking about. Should I book my tickets to New York yet for the Penn State Bowl? Just quickly, because we have to cram most of our defensive conversation in the next 5 or 6 minutes, Dave. Are you thinking that Penn State Bowl, or I know people have we talked about the Las Vegas Bowl after on our Friday special. What are you thinking about from the bowl season for what Penn State should expect?
Yeah, it seems like the 3 options are the Music City Bowl, the Las Vegas Bowl, or the Pinstripe Bowl. And as a devout Mets fan who does not want to step foot in Yankee Stadium if he doesn't have to, I'm rooting for anything but that. So
I'm rooting for not covering a game at 10:30 at night, which is when the Las Vegas Bowl is. So I'm rooting for the Music City Bowl because it's within driving distance and in the central time zone. But that's me being selfish. I know a lot of people who would love to take a trip to Vegas in the winter, and so that's kind of where we're at when it comes to the bowls. We do have to talk about the defense, at least for a little bit here to end the show. Nate, how do you give up I want to make sure I'm reading this right. 99 yards on one drive and 2 15-play drives in the same game. How do you manage to do that?
You give up chunk plays and miss tackles.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the answer. They did that a bunch, and for a variety of reasons, but I thought you made a point in your analysis today that was great. Kenneth Walker's yardage totals came on 4 carries. He had 98 yards or whatever it was, right? That's the difference. Is Michigan State's chunk plays were a massive part of what their success was offensively on Saturday. And they just that's it. Like I thought that for the most part, Penn State defensively did a decent job of bottling up Michigan State offense. They just had lapses, and those lapses came back to crush them.
They were good on. So this is the interesting thing about that game is we mentioned this when we talked about the offense is both teams were running the ball ineffectively. Michigan State was worse on first down than Penn State was. It just third down they made it happen. Dave, when it comes to the defense, how do you evaluate the secondary's performance given the conditions and what they were asked to do by what Michigan State was doing as opposed to their counterparts on the other side of the field?
Yeah, clearly it wasn't awesome, right? And you touched on third down there. Michigan State actually had a larger average third down to go distance than Penn State in this game, and still converted at a 50% rate. So yeah, it wasn't great. I don't know if Penn State's defensive backs struggled with the conditions or whatever. But clearly something was not right. And then again, I mean, the play that sticks out to me and just kind of, it was the final nail in the coffin. But again, it's that 4th and 15. Peyton Thorne just kind of throws that lob, and I think it was Johnny Dixon who got mossed there.
Yep.
That can't really happen. That's like the one thing that can't happen in that scenario, actually. So yeah, certainly there's some stuff to pick on. And I've been pretty defensive over the Penn State secondary on this show, I think, for most of the season, but not their best showing by any means.
Yeah, and so one thing you mentioned, Nate, the inability of Sean Clifford to really extend plays, or sometimes the willingness to. I don't know, because there were some games where he would, and there's some games where he wouldn't. And in this game, he did not extend the play. He sat in the pocket and delivered. And as a passer, he was great. But what Peyton Thorne did by moving around is he forced the Penn State zones to react. And when you react, there is no second reaction in the snow, creating, busted plays and big catch and runs on scramble drills. And Peyton Thorne's movement, to me, in those situations was what changed things. And Sean Clifford stayed in the pocket, and he got sacked 4 times. That's a part of the analysis, too, when it comes to the ability of the offense to overcome negative plays, because when it came to plays where Michigan State got into 3rd and 8, they didn't convert all of them. They just converted enough of them to make it happen. The defensive line, we talked a little bit about Kenneth Walker. Nate, how do you think they responded in the second half of the season without P.J. Mustipher, and how do you think those young guys developed or didn't over the final 5 games?
Yeah, I thought they did as well as could possibly be expected of them, legitimately. I mean, I think that when you look at Penn State's defensive line, and I'm going to make an assumption right now that P.J. Mustipher is coming back, that's 3 of the 4 presumed starters on Penn State's defensive line potentially returning next year, in addition to guys who have developed, right, as the season has progressed. That should make this unit fairly strong. I think fairly strong next season. I think there's plenty of potential there. And, look, like, as is the case, sometimes it's the adverse situations that end up being the most beneficial to your development, even though they can be uncomfortable at times. And I think that's a situation that is probably going to bear itself out next season.
So you think they're going to be okay next season? Even I would say, I don't personally believe, just like Noah Cain this year, I don't believe that P.J. Mustipher will be 100% to start next season. But you think for the majority of the season, they'll be okay at defensive tackle, knowing that he'll provide something, and these young guys have gotten enough experience to take that next step next year. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we need to see what happens with Hakeem Beamon for sure.
Yep.
I think you need to see, the continued development of Vizard, and
I want to see Jordan Vandenberg next year. I really want to see Jordan Vandenberg next year. But yeah,
they love him.
Yeah,
they love him. They think. I mean, he's a powerhouse in the weight room, and plays the game in a style that they like. And he had a year, so he's not a true freshman. He's a redshirt. Age demographic here, right? So he's a 3rd-year guy coming back next season. I think that they think that there's a lot of potential there.
What are you guys thinking about going into the unknown period, as we'll find out bowl games coming up next weekend? What are you guys thinking about coming out of this game heading into the off season? Dave, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm interested in their roster construction process. Obviously, we're kind of on alert for players maybe entering the transfer portal who either from Penn State or that Penn State might be interested in. I'm curious to see how aggressive they are, because they were really aggressive last season and it paid off pretty well for them, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So do they ramp that up even more? Do they have space to ramp that up even more? So just kind of that process to me is what I'm thinking about.
Nate, can I just mark you down for facilities? Dorm rooms? What are you thinking about this offseason? Because National Signing Day is coming up this month. What David just talked about, we'll have some offseason roster building. What are you thinking about for Penn State football as we exit the season?
Yeah, no, I mean, no one specific thing. I think there's a lot happening. I really do. I think there are, we will have no shortage of ideas for things to talk about for Penn State football this offseason, because that is the reality. Is this team will look different next season. It will play different next season. Things will be going on, obviously, behind the scenes at Penn State. I would like to see what happens with the coaching staff. I mean, I think that they very, very much value consistency. I think that is a thing that helps college football programs, generally speaking. But with some of the performances this year, I don't know exactly what moves need to be made, if any moves need to be made. And so that's going to be something that is going to probably clear itself up here over the next couple of weeks.
And to answer Ryan's question, a perfect question to get out on, we are still building our plan for the offseason. When Penn State football news does break, we will be here on YouTube. But the BWI Daily Edition coming to you Monday through Friday for now till the end of time. And we will be covering Penn State football news as it happens. But the specifics of when and how is yet to be determined, so stay tuned. That's why you need to subscribe and hit the notification button so you don't miss any breaking news and any breaking news shows or any live shows from Blue White Illustrated. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Thank you so much to everybody who came and participated in this show this season. For Nate Bauer and Dave Eckert, my heroes, we'll talk to you next time.